Something extraordinary happened this week. Not in a courtroom, not on Capitol Hill, but on national television, where a man who once served as Donald Trump's most trusted legal defender looked directly into the camera and said what millions have been thinking, but few in his position dare to speak out loud. The president, he declared, is experiencing cognitive decline. Not subtle decline, not gradual decline. Palpable, undeniable, accelerating decline. Ty Cobb, the former White House special counsel who worked inside the Trump administration during the first term, didn't mince words when he appeared on MSNBC. When asked by host Ari Melber whether Trump's behavior reflected long-standing personality issues or something new, Cobb's response cut through the diplomatic language that usually surrounds these conversations. "No, I think there's been a significant decline," he stated flatly. He's always been driven by narcissism, but I think the dementia and the cognitive decline are palpable, as do many experts, including many physicians. Let that sink in for a moment. A man who defended Trump from the inside, who saw him operate daily at the height of presidential power, who built his career partially on his service to this administration, just went on national television and used the word dementia. Not speculation, not concern, a direct assessment that the president's mental faculties are deteriorating in ways that can no longer be dismissed or explained away. The White House response was swift and predictable. Communications Director Stephen Chung released a statement calling Cobb an eternal stain on the great name he shares with a baseball legend, and suggesting he should change his name to Ty Loser. It's the kind of schoolyard insult that has become the administration's signature move when faced with uncomfortable truths. Attack the messenger, discredit the source, never address the substance. But here's what they can't dismiss. Ty Cobb isn't some political opponent with an axe to grind. He's a distinguished lawyer who left a prestigious partnership at Hogan and Lovells to serve in the White House. He's not a Democrat operative. He's not part of the so-called resistance. He's someone who worked closely with Trump and is now sounding an alarm based on what he's observed. And he's far from alone. Dr. Vin Gupta, a medical analyst for NBC News and former chief medical officer at Amazon Pharmacy, has been tracking what he describes as a troubling trajectory. After Trump's appearance at the World Economic Forum in Davos, where the president repeatedly confused Iceland with Greenland, delivered rambling speeches that jumped between dozens of topics, and displayed increasingly erratic behavior, Gupta went on record with his assessment. "It seems like it's getting worse," he told viewers, referencing the trend line he's been observing. The acting out, behavior changes, lashing out, acting unreasonable. One could say this is his core fundamental personality, based on what we've seen over, frankly, his entire adult life, but it's getting worse. Gupta specifically noted behaviors consistent with early-stage Alzheimer's disease or frontotemporal dementia. Word-finding difficulties, tangential speech that wanders from topic to topic without logical connection, memory lapses that happen mid-sentence, the inability to maintain focus for even brief periods. These aren't partisan attacks. These are clinical observations from medical professionals who understand what cognitive decline looks like and who are watching it unfold in real time on the world stage. Trump's own niece, clinical psychologist Mary Trump, has made similar observations. In a recent interview with CNN, she described watching her uncle's cognitive health rapidly getting worse in recent months. "I think that Donald has had undiagnosed, untreated psychiatric disorders for many, many years, predating his first administration," she explained. "But given his advancing age, clearly there seem to be some indications that he has some cognitive issues. Hence all of the cognitive tests he's taking and the MRIs we've heard about." She pointed to his inability to stay on topic, his seeming lack of awareness about his surroundings or his audience, and what she describes as a deteriorating capacity to maintain the persona he's projected his entire life. Mary Trump has a particularly haunting perspective on this because she watched it happen before. Her grandfather, Fred Trump Sr., was diagnosed with mild senile dementia in October 1991. By the mid-1990s, his condition had progressed to the point where he no longer recognised his own family members. Mary describes standing with him at Mar-a-Lago when he looked at her and politely asked his daughter Mary Ann who that nice lady was, pointing to his own granddaughter. That same vacant, confused look, she says, is what she now sees in her uncle's eyes. Fred Trump's medical records document a tragic decline. In October 1991, his physician noted obvious memory decline in recent years and significant memory impairment. A few months later, another doctor reported that Fred did not know his birth date or age, among other difficulties. He died in 1999 at age 93, 8 years after his diagnosis, with Alzheimer's disease listed as a contributing factor to his death from pneumonia. The elder Trump's dementia wasn't a brief end-of-life episode. It was a long, documented deterioration that the family witnessed over nearly a decade. And here's what makes this relevant beyond just family history. Genetics matter with Alzheimer's disease. According to the Alzheimer's Association, having a parent or sibling with the condition significantly increases your risk. If you have more than one first-degree relative with Alzheimer's, that risk increases further. Donald Trump's father had it. His cousin John Walters had dementia. His nephew Fred Trump III stated publicly last year that dementia runs in the family, and that he sees disturbing parallels between his grandfather's decline and what he's observing in his uncle now. Trump himself has acknowledged this family history, though he's been careful about how he frames it. In 2019, he admitted that his father had Alzheimer's in his last few years. But family members paint a different picture, describing a much longer period of cognitive deterioration that began in the early 1990s and progressively worsened. Trump's testimony in legal proceedings related to his father's estate also raises questions. He claimed under oath that his father was sharp as a tack until just before he died, a claim that contradicts medical documentation and the recollections of other family members. Some have suggested Trump had motivation to misrepresent the timeline, as he stood to inherit more from a contested will if he could prove his father was mentally competent when signing it. Against this backdrop of genetic predisposition and family history, the recent incidents take on deeper significance. Let's catalogue what we've witnessed just in recent weeks. In December, Trump fell asleep during a cabinet meeting that lasted over 90 minutes. Video footage shows him sitting motionless with his eyes closed while cabinet secretaries spoke. The White House initially claimed he was listening attentively and merely resting his eyes, but the visual evidence tells a different story. This wasn't someone closing their eyes for a moment. This was someone struggling to stay awake during an important government meeting. In January, during a military parade commemorating actions in Venezuela, Trump appeared to doze off while Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane briefed the press on the operation. Photographers captured the 79-year-old president swaying slightly, with his eyes fluttering closed, as the general described how more than 150 aircraft had been deployed overnight. Then, later that same month, Trump fell asleep again during a milk legislation signing ceremony. His eyes were completely shut at multiple points as Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins spoke about dairy policy. When he woke up, he felt compelled to clarify how to spell whole milk, explaining that it's whole with a W for those of you that have a problem. Trump's defensive explanations for these episodes have been inconsistent and increasingly strange. He told the Wall Street Journal that cabinet meetings are boring as hell and that he closes his eyes because he's impatient to leave. He claimed he wasn't sleeping, just resting his eyes because it's very relaxing. He suggested that cameras simply catch him blinking at unfortunate moments. But these explanations don't match what everyone can plainly see in the footage. This isn't someone blinking. This isn't someone looking bored. This is someone who cannot maintain consciousness during official government functions. Dr. Gupta has pointed out that sleep issues themselves can be a concerning sign, especially when combined with other symptoms. Trump has admitted he gets very little sleep at night, a factor that can significantly impact cognitive function and cardiovascular health. But chronic sleep deprivation doesn't fully explain the pattern we're seeing. People who are merely tired don't consistently fall asleep during the most high-stakes moments of their job. They don't lose the ability to recognize when staying awake is absolutely critical. Then there are the speech patterns. Linguists and medical professionals who have analysed Trump's public statements have documented measurable changes over time. His vocabulary has simplified. His sentences have become shorter and more fragmented. He makes what are called phonemic paraphasic errors, substituting sounds or syllables in ways that suggest word-finding difficulties. At a recent event, Trump struggled to pronounce acetaminophen, stumbling over the syllables multiple times. During his Davos speech, he said, "We appreciate all of the cooperation we've been giving," before seeming to catch himself and adding, "We've been giving great cooperation." The original phrasing didn't make grammatical sense, but he appeared not to notice until midway through the sentence. A Washington Post analysis of Trump's speeches found a 13% increase in all or nothing terms like always and never, a 32% higher ratio of negative to positive words, and a 69% increase in profanity compared to 2016. His average rally length has nearly doubled from 45 minutes in 2016 to 82 minutes now, but the content has become significantly more scattered. Experts describe this combination of longer speeches with less coherent content as potentially indicative of advancing cognitive decline. It's as if the internal filter that helps most people organize and edit their thoughts before speaking has begun to fail. The confusion is becoming harder to ignore. During a recent trip to Iowa, Trump told the crowd that China will be sending me a bill very shortly supporting year-round E15 to my desk very quickly. He appeared to believe that China, not Congress, would be sending him legislation to sign. When asked about the Federal Reserve investigation into Jerome Powell, Trump's response was completely disconnected from the question. Well, he's got a building that, I build buildings and I build them under budget, ahead of schedule, Trump rambled, never actually addressing what he'd been asked. When reporters followed up about his lawsuit against his own IRS for $10 billion, he simply shouted, "ABC, fake news," and called on someone else without answering. Perhaps most concerning was an incident at the White House when Trump turned to look for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who was standing directly beside him. "Where's Bobby? Bobby? Where's Bobby?" Trump asked, looking around the room despite RFK Jr. being inches away. Someone had to point out that Kennedy was right there before Trump finally noticed him. These aren't the kinds of mistakes anyone makes when they're fully present and aware of their surroundings. These are moments that suggest a fundamental disconnect between what's happening and what the person perceives is happening. The physical symptoms add another layer to the concern. Trump has been photographed repeatedly with large, dark bruises on both hands. The discoloration is extensive and obvious, prompting questions about what's causing it. Trump has claimed it's from taking 325 milligrams of aspirin daily, 4 times the standard preventive dose his doctors recommend. He says he wants nice, thin blood pouring through my heart, a phrase that makes medical professionals wince. High-dose aspirin increases the risk of internal bleeding and bruising, but many doctors question whether aspirin alone would cause bruising this severe and persistent. There's also the matter of Trump's gait. Multiple observers have noted that he walks more carefully and slowly than he used to, particularly when descending stairs. Dr. Gupta mentioned that Trump seems to be walking gingerly and suggested that when you couple that physical change with all the cognitive symptoms, it makes one wonder what's actually happening behind the scenes. Trump was also diagnosed with chronic venous insufficiency in July 2025, a condition where blood pools in the legs due to compromised vein function. While the White House described it as benign and common, it does cause visible swelling in the ankles and calves, something Trump has taken steps to conceal from cameras. In September, Trump appeared at a 9/11 memorial event with his face visibly drooping on one side. Photographs from that day sparked immediate speculation about whether he'd suffered a stroke. Then, Professor Bruce Davidson of Washington State University's medical school went further, suggesting on a podcast that Trump had indeed suffered a stroke months earlier, likely on the left side of the brain, based on multiple lines of evidence, including the president's shuffling gait and other physical changes. The White House vehemently denied the claim, calling it absolute bullshit and dismissing Davidson as a left-wing nutjob. But they didn't address the specific evidence Davidson cited. They simply attacked his credibility and moved on. Trump's response to questions about his health has been to take cognitive tests repeatedly and brag about the results. He's claimed to have aced the Montreal Cognitive Assessment 3 times now, scoring perfect marks each time. But here's what makes that concerning rather than reassuring. The Montreal Cognitive Assessment is a screening tool designed to detect moderate to severe cognitive impairment. It's a basic test that asks people to identify animals, remember a short list of words, and draw a clock. Passing it doesn't mean you're cognitively sharp. It means you don't have advanced dementia. As Dr. Gupta pointed out, taking this test repeatedly, especially multiple times in a single year, suggests doctors aren't assessing whether dementia exists, they're monitoring its progression. Psychologist Dr. John Gartner made this point explicitly. You could maybe justify giving someone the mocker once, just on their age, just as part of a physical. If you're giving it to him 3 times, that means you're not assessing dementia. That means you're monitoring dementia. The frequency of the testing is itself a red flag. You don't keep administering the same cognitive screening to someone whose mental faculties are stable. You do it when you're tracking changes over time. Trump has also undergone what the White House called a preventative MRI, though later he corrected this to say it was actually a CT scan. Neither procedure is routine preventative care for someone without specific symptoms or concerns. These are imaging studies typically ordered when doctors are looking for something, whether it's evidence of stroke, tumours, vascular problems, or other neurological issues. The fact that Trump needed this imaging at all raises questions that the administration hasn't adequately answered. The political implications of all this are staggering. Trump spent much of his 2024 campaign attacking Joe Biden's age and cognitive fitness, making it a central theme of his messaging. Now, he's become the oldest sitting president in American history, and the very concerns he raised about his opponent are being raised about him by medical experts, former allies, and members of his own family. The irony is sharp, but the stakes are far higher than political point scoring. This is the person with access to the nuclear codes. This is the person conducting foreign policy and making life and death decisions about military deployments and national security. The international dimension makes this even more urgent. At Davos, Trump repeatedly confused Iceland with Greenland, 2 completely different countries. He shared private text messages from world leaders on his social media accounts. He went on manic posting sprees and delivered speeches that observers described as incoherent and rambling. Foreign allies are watching this. Adversaries are watching this. They're making their own assessments about American stability and leadership, and those assessments inform how they engage with us diplomatically and strategically. Trump's letter to Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre became its own international incident. In the letter, Trump linked his desire to acquire Greenland to not receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, suggesting that because Norway hadn't given him the award, he felt free to disregard peace and pursue territorial expansion. The letter was so bizarre that multiple European officials publicly questioned Trump's mental state. Ty Cobb called it deranged, demented, and insane. Dr. Gupta said it crossed a line of proper adult behaviour and should have prompted a thorough public assessment of the president's neurological fitness. When a reporter asked Trump how far he would be willing to go to seize Greenland from Denmark, a NATO ally, Trump responded simply, "You'll find out." That's not the language of diplomacy. That's not strategic ambiguity. That's the kind of response that makes military planners in Europe start contingency planning for scenarios they never imagined they'd need to consider. It's the kind of statement that fundamentally undermines international stability, because allies no longer know what to expect from American leadership. Inside the administration, there are signs that others recognize the problem, even if they won't say so publicly. Reports indicate that Trump's staff has been working to limit his public appearances and reduce the number of meetings he's required to attend. In an interview with New York Magazine, sources close to the president confirmed that schedules are being adjusted to accommodate what they delicately described as his need for fewer, more important meetings. This isn't normal. This is the kind of accommodation you make when someone can no longer handle a full workload. It's what happens when the people around a leader realize they need to manage and contain the situation, rather than enable full executive function. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has even spoken publicly about Trump's diet, describing it as unhinged and highly unhealthy. Kennedy explained that Trump eats premium meals when at Mar-a-Lago or the White House, but switches to a heavy diet of fast food and candy when traveling. "I don't know how he's alive, but he is," Kennedy said, suggesting Trump would need an inhuman constitution to maintain such a lifestyle at his age. These aren't the words of someone who believes the president is in excellent health. These are the words of someone who's seen the reality up close and is genuinely concerned. The pattern here is unmistakable. You have a president with a family history of dementia. You have measurable changes in his speech patterns and cognitive function. You have repeated instances of falling asleep during official duties. You have physical symptoms that suggest underlying health problems. You have medical experts, including some who normally avoid commenting on public figures, breaking their usual reticence to warn about what they're observing. You have former allies like Ty Cobb going on record to sound alarms. You have family members who've watched this disease devastate their family before describing disturbing parallels with what they're seeing now. And you have an administration that responds to every question, every concern, every documented incident with the same playbook. Attack the messenger, dismiss the evidence, claim everything is perfect, brag about test scores on screenings designed to detect severe impairment. It's a strategy built on the hope that if they deny loudly enough, people will doubt what they can see with their own eyes. But here's what we can't afford to doubt. The presidency isn't a ceremonial role. It's not a figurehead position. It requires sharp judgment, sustained focus, the ability to process complex information under pressure, and the capacity to make decisions with global consequences in real time. If the person holding that office is experiencing cognitive decline, if their family history suggests progressive degeneration, if medical experts are seeing signs consistent with dementia, then we have a responsibility to take that seriously. Not as a political attack, not as partisan point scoring, as a matter of basic governance and national security. This isn't about Trump's policies or his politics. This is about whether the person making life and death decisions has the cognitive capacity to do so effectively. It's about whether the mechanisms we have in place to ensure presidential fitness for office are working, or whether they've been overwhelmed by partisan loyalty and the president's own defensiveness. It's about what happens when the people who should be holding him accountable, his cabinet, his advisors, his party leadership, decide that protecting him politically is more important than protecting the country from a potentially impaired executive. Mary Trump has suggested that her uncle is finally confronting his own mortality in ways he never had to before. She describes him as deeply uncertain and reckoning with the possibility that he may not be immortal after all. If that's true, if Trump is aware at some level that his faculties are declining, that his father's fate may be his own, then perhaps that explains some of the increasingly erratic behavior. People who feel control slipping away often grasp harder for it. They become more aggressive, more combative, more desperate to prove they're still in command. The attacks on anyone who questions him, the constant need to demonstrate dominance, the refusal to acknowledge any weakness, all of it could be the response of someone who knows something is wrong, but can't admit it, even to himself. Ty Cobb ended his interview by emphasizing something crucial. He said that people outside the United States can see what's happening. They're not bound by American political tribalism or the partisan filter that keeps so many here from acknowledging obvious truths. They're watching the leader of the world's most powerful nation exhibit signs of cognitive decline on the world stage, and they're drawing their own conclusions about what that means for American credibility, stability, and reliability. We should be drawing those same conclusions, not because we wish Trump ill, not because we want to see him fail, but because the office he holds demands clarity, focus, and full cognitive function. And increasingly, there are too many signs that something fundamental has changed. The man who once could speak for hours without notes, who prided himself on his sharp memory and quick wit, is now falling asleep in meetings, confusing countries, losing his train of thought mid-sentence, and requiring cognitive screening tests administered multiple times a year. That's not normal aging. That's not the media inventing controversy. That's a documented pattern of decline observed by medical professionals, former allies, and family members who've seen this trajectory before. And when someone as measured and respected as Ty Cobb looks into a camera and says the dementia is palpable, when he says that denying it is dishonest, we need to listen. Not because he's a political opponent, because he's someone who worked alongside Trump, who defended him, who saw him up close in the most sensitive and demanding contexts. And now he's warning us that what he's seeing cannot be ignored. The stakes are too high. The office is too important. The decisions are too consequential. We deserve a president who can meet the demands of the job. And if Ty Cobb, medical experts, and Trump's own family members are right about what's happening, then we need to have an honest conversation about what comes next. Not tomorrow, not after the next embarrassing incident. Now. While there's still time to ensure that whoever is leading this country has the full mental capacity the position requires. If this breakdown of what's really happening behind the headlines was useful to you, if it helped you understand the full scope of what medical experts and former insiders are warning about, hit that subscribe button. And in the comments, I want to know what you think. Are we watching cognitive decline unfold in real time? And if so, what should happen next?